and welcome back to episode 5 of the Football Podcast, where today we'll be discussing about the return of football. Today alongside me we have Nathan McIlwain.
Hello.
And 3 special appearances by Mr Hine.
Hello.
Mr Hulse.
Hello.
And Mr Noye.
Hello.
Lovely, absolutely lovely. All said hello. So nice to be back. Thank you very much for joining us today. So in the first news, we have Watford and Burnley players have been confirmed positive for coronavirus. What will this have an effect, Nathan?
I think it'll have a massive effect on just them 2 teams, because obviously 748 tests were carried out throughout the whole from 19 clubs, because Tottenham did have like individual testing and the whole squad and staff tested negative, so that's quite a big up for them. But in terms of Watford and Burnley, it was confirmed that one player was called Mariappa from Watford, but it hasn't been confirmed what the Burnley and the rest of Watford players have been tested positive. But I think it won't have that much of an impact on the rest of the project restart, because obviously it is only 6 of our 748. The rest turned out negative. So I think that's quite a positive for the Premier League on their plans to restart the season.
And you're talking about a positive there, so it's all trying to keep that mentally as well. So, Mr. Hine, do you think that players will now think, players that play for Watford and Burnley, do you think now that they'll think, well, some of our players have had it, do you think they're mentally, will they go down?
No, I wouldn't have thought so, because they've all been tested as well. I think if we sort of look to our European neighbours, we normally trust in what the Germans are doing, and when they restarted, they also had 6 cases when they first retested. So I think, like Nathan said, it could be a fairly positive result. We wouldn't expect nobody to have it, and it's just interesting, really, in terms of the news. Mariappa didn't believe he had it. He's got no symptoms whatsoever. He feels absolutely fit as a fiddle. So there's a surprise there. I think the other 2 staff are not playing staff. From Watford, so I think we expect to see some positive results, but everyone's being tested regularly, so I don't think it has massive effects. I worry more about maybe influential players like Troy Deeney at Watford, and his opinions and what his choices are, whether that influences people more.
Of course, and you're saying about the regular, just keeping that ticking over. I really like that idea, and I think they should just take that on, of course. And so, Mr. Noye, if the players have got it, the staff, will that push them back and they'll keep on getting furloughed? Do you think this is good?
Yeah, do you know what? It's a confusing one, really. I think what Mr. Hine just said there, when you've got someone like Troy Deeney, who's the captain and the figurehead of a club, making a fairly bold public statement saying he's not prepared to go back. He's pretty much the heartbeat of a club, isn't he? And you can certainly feel like a lot of those players will follow his lead. And I think I actually really admired what he came out in the press and said that, it's he's doing it because he feels like he's got a vulnerable youngster with respiratory complications. So when you look at 2 clubs like Burnley and Watford, there was another piece on Sky Sports News today that's talking about there might be an awful lot more confirmed cases of coronaviruses within the clubs, but other clubs might just be managing their own press a little bit better about it, because for some of the clubs towards the bottom of the table, they've also got the threat of relegation to try and stave off. So I think whilst there's without a doubt the global pandemic spin to it, I think we'd be naive to think that a lot of clubs weren't thinking about the financial implications of it as well, particularly those that might be in danger of dropping into the Championship. So yeah, it's. I think clubs are probably going to be managing their own press pretty well at the moment. But I really admire what Troy Deeney came out and said. Really admire it.
Of course, and you're saying the heart, and it's all about the heart and keeping just the press, because the press is probably one of the most biggest parts of football, and you've just got to keep them, safe and keeping them just enjoying what they're doing, but keeping them safe as well. So financially, will they still pay the player as much, Mr. Hulse?
Well, I think, kind of like my nephew was saying, he kind of came out and said he has no idea how he got it. He said he's been self-isolating. He's been out for a couple of dog walks. He's quite a private person. So actually, he's really quite shocked. And I think in that scenario, to be quite honest, you've got to feel for the guy and kind of go, if he's taken all the necessary precautions, I don't really see why financially he should be implicated. I think, sadly, there's some other footballers that have not followed protocols. And to be quite frank, if one of those guys tested positive for COVID-19, I'd probably have a slightly different opinion on that and suggest that some financial penalisation would be the least I would expect from the FA or their clubs for not following a simple lockdown procedure. So I think, Matt, yeah, I can understand why you might financially penalise them, but I think that does depend on the lives they've led for the last kind of 2-3 months for certain. I think that the 6 that have tested positive, it's less than 0.5%. So I think when you're making a decision, 748 players, it's like 0.4%. I was doing a bit of maths before, because I knew I had Mr Noye and Mr Hine on, big statisticians. And I'd hate to think people are going to make decisions on such a low percentage. But without doubt, it is a problem. Yeah, definitely. But like Mr Hine said, it is to be expected.
And it is, yeah, of course it's going to be expected, and it's going to be interesting. The press as well, like Mr. Noye was saying, it's what's being expected, and it's needing to be led by the club, and financially hope that they sustain it and keep that club going. So another point is that League One clubs resume the end of the season. Do we think this is a good idea, Mr. Hine?
It's a really difficult one because the sort of Premier League is its own beast, and then lower down the leagues are very different. And we've got these tables kind of in the middle of it all, where Premier League clubs will survive playing behind closed doors. Lower league clubs, it will cost them a lot to play behind closed doors. They still need lots of staff on there. Most of the money they get is through gate receipts, and we've got this league in the middle where they're between sort of a rock and a hard place. Looking at the names of the clubs in there, you have got some very small clubs, but then also some former Premier League clubs in there. So it's a real tough league to be sure exactly what the right thing to do is. But obviously you start with the fact that players must be safe. And we need to sustain these clubs lower down the Football League.
I would, we, like you're saying there, sustain it and keep it ticking over, and maybe behind closed doors. So, Mr. Hulse, behind closed doors, do you think they should have maybe a few fans?
I suppose for the clubs, it would be impossible to pick those few fans. I don't know how that would happen. So I think it's either behind closed doors or it's not, and I'm not sure where the middle ground lies with that. But financially, they need the gate receipts, and if they start playing, they have to pull players out of furlough, and therefore all their costs go up. So I do think a lot of them don't want to play with behind closed doors. I think probably they could finish the end of the season behind closed doors financially. I think the biggest worry is the start of next season. A lot of people are saying they won't be able to, have fans till January, February, March. I think a lot of clubs are saying they can finish this season, but they simply won't be able to get through next season. I think that's the big concern for me looking forward is not really right now. It's actually September, October, November, December. What's going to happen there? And I wonder about the other message, kind of, Matt, that comes out of this when if we kept League One going, but we stopped Women's Premier League or the Women's Premier League, which they're talking about. I wonder what message that sends out to the general public about female sport and women's football. And I think that's something that they've got to think really carefully about and where that kind of sits in the pecking order. If we put the top end of women's football and we cancel it, but we let the top 4 levels of men's football carry on, I wonder what message that sends out to kind of young females aspiring to be professional sports people. And I think that needs to come into the equation when we think about which leagues carry on and which leagues don't.
Can I add that? Yeah, so obviously, women's football is rising and it's become like a more popular sport. I have no problem with it at all. It can carry on, obviously when it's safe. But obviously,
I like where this is going.
Well, it's dangerous.
Glad you got no problem with it, Nathan.
It's not my fault. Yeah, but I personally think the League One should continue because it's obviously their choice by itself. It's not, we decide for League One and women's football. It's their choice if they carry on and if they get the green light by the government and other sports authorities. So it's not really a debate whether is women's football less favoured. It's more about individual leagues deciding that it will continue.
What's your thoughts from because I know you're a Portsmouth fan, Nathan, aren't you? And they're a League One team. I suppose they were pushing for promotion, weren't they? And I think everyone would be naive to think, if you were a Liverpool fan, as my brother-in-law and my best friend are, they're desperate for the season to finish, and I know exactly why. And other teams, you're thinking actually, is there a slightly more divisive reason that they want it to finish, to meet their club's own ends? And actually, I'd look at it and think, to come on to the back of what Mr Hulse said, I think there's probably something slightly bigger afoot here, actually, about actually just getting some sort of spectacle sports up and running that are less about the football and more about the public good and the public well-being. Imagine what an actual lift it would be to get a bit of professional sport up and running, not necessarily to meet the own ends of the sport, but actually as an entertainment for a British public. That actual sporting entertainment has been pretty sparse of late. I found myself looking through the German leagues to try and put a bet on the other day. Didn't really know what was going on. So, yeah, I'd imagine as a Portsmouth fan, you're pretty keen to see them up in the Championship, aren't you?
Yeah, and because the top 10 teams in League One, they're the only teams that are agreeing for the season to continue, because the top 10 teams, they're well within a chance of getting promoted, but the lower half of the league, they're saying, well, if we're not going to get promoted or in the battle for relegation, because I think it's almost confirmed that it will be Bolton, Tranmere and Southend going down. One, because Bolton did get the minus 12 points taken off at the start of the season, but I think they're going to go there anyway, even if the season does continue. But I think it wouldn't be fair if they ended the season for all teams. Yeah, maybe end the season for the bottom half. Go, well, why not have a little tournament between the top 10 to see who gets promoted, like top 3 get promoted, and have like 2 finals and then 1 third playoff, and whoever wins out of each of them 3 goes up into the Championship.
Nathan, can I ask you, if Portsmouth were in the relegation zone, but they were 1 point off safety, would you have that same opinion?
Very good point.
Well, yeah, because I like seeing, teams like Peterborough, Oxford, like all them big clubs that are in League One going up. But I wouldn't see Portsmouth going in the relegation zone anytime soon. So.
But those teams in the relegation zone are supported by thousands, and I just wonder what your opinion is from their point of view.
What? So say if the table got turned on its head, there was Sunderland, Portsmouth, and Ipswich in the relegation zone, it would be a totally different. It would be a history pretty much. You wouldn't have them sort of big clubs in the bottom 3 of the 3rd tier of English football, would you? So.
Well,
wouldn't be the first time you've been there, Nathan.
How did they get there?
I'm surprised from the pandemic.
Well, thank you very much for all those points there. I overall we're discussing that it's just everything really, from women's football, how it's just going to return. And I've wrote down on my notes, Nathan, you said about history. All of this is going to create history for the next hundreds of years, and I think to be part of it is just a great thing, because you can tell your grandparents, your children about this. So I think it's a massive thing, this coronavirus, and it's taught lots of us of how to be talking about women's football, how to really just understand the game and keep everyone engaged. So I think it's really important that we discuss that there. So Premier League players returned yesterday to training. We discussed this last episode. So Mr Noye, what do you think about this returning to the Premier League training?
Well, I don't really see, I mean, I think the German league demonstrated it. Football's a pretty tactile sport, and it's never been beyond me to engage in a bit of football bashing. But football's a very tactile. Sorry, Nathan. But you saw the Germans over the weekend, hugging and kissing each other, and that didn't look like social distancing to me. I just wonder whether, not specifically footballers, whether any professional sports people can actually train with any sort of relevance in terms of the rigour and the demand of the game without being close to each other. Of course they can run. We can all go for a run and do fitness and circuits. But I understand that clubs do need to try and get back to normality. And I think there's two things running aside at the moment. There's obviously the number one priority that's front and centre, that is the country's health and well-being. And whilst people are discussing the monetary value of the Premier League, in one town, in the next town, someone's mother, father, granddaughter, they might be dying of the coronavirus. So I think context is important. I think as long as it can be demonstrated that it's safe, or as safe as possible, I do think it's probably the right decision to start those wheels creaking back into motion. But as we talk as a school, we can't absolutely eliminate all of the risk. All that we can do is all do the right thing and try and manage it, really. So I think inevitably clubs will start to head back, but it will probably look quite different in every club.
Yeah, so like you're saying, hugging, kissing, all of this, and you think, really, you've been given all this advice, and then you just throw it away. That does not look good, does it? If you think about it, it really doesn't look good. And all those young players returning as well. So with the under-16s, Mr. Hine, that come in with the Premier League, do you think they'll return?
Oh my goodness. What's he doing?
I didn't hear that. There was some sharp noise. Under-16s returning.
Yes, or over 16s. Those young clubs in the Premier League, will they return?
I absolutely don't know, but I think what we're trying to say is football return, and if it can be returned safely, grassroots-wise, we kind of want everything to get back to some semblance of normality, but we absolutely know it's going to be different. Unfortunately, there is a massive divide between the haves and have-nots in football. So the elite clubs can return and financially can make sure everyone is safe. You worry about how far does that go down that people can still afford to make sure people are safe. Whether all clubs can give the same level of security for all their players, women, children, etc., etc. I think you just want assurances that you're not putting anyone in danger and you're supporting the general strategy of the government and the NHS.
Yes, of course, and the NHS playing a massive part, and all about the. We got the bypasses. Yeah. So talking about the danger and how it's quite dangerous going back with under or over 16s and how that all affects it. So, Mr. Hulse, the Premier League, do you think that they'll be restarting pay for the staff now the training's back?
Yeah, I think so. I think one of you guys touched on a point last week, I think it might have been Will, about the fact that the staff behind these kind of Premier League footballers are as important as the footballers. They don't get the headlines. They don't necessarily get the kind of pay, but like the doctors, the physios, and those guys are key to making it all run. So I do think those guys are definitely going to kind of have to come back and be in full pay, full employment, which is definitely a bonus. Those doctors, those physios, if someone gets injured on the pitch, they can't stay 2 meters away. but I would expect them to be looking, I would expect, essentially, I didn't see it in the Bundesliga at the weekend. I have to be honest, I was actually washing my car with the Bundesliga on the radio. So I didn't watch any, but I was listening to it. But I don't know, I'd expect those guys to be wearing like full PPE, should they be on the pitch, kind of helping a player out. And they're the kind of differences that I'd expect to see from Premier League before to Premier League after. If we can't if we can't keep the 2 metre social distance, what are we going to do differently to actually kind of keep the barriers?
Of course, yeah.
I mean, watching the Bundesliga, listening to the Bundesliga on the radio, I mean, we are scraping the barrel for some sporting entertainment, aren't we?
Yeah, we are.
It's hard work.
Yeah.
Very hard work, yes. I like your point, Mr Hulse, as well. So the big question now, Nathan, I'm going to ask you this. Manchester City want to appeal against a UEFA Champions League ban. Overall, what do you think about this?
I don't think they'll get it, because obviously they were found breaching lockdown rules. No, not lockdown, sorry. The financial rules in the European leagues, that they weren't following what they've been set out. But obviously this season they did get to the last 16, but didn't get to play it against Real Madrid. They won 2-1 in the first leg, but they didn't manage to get the second leg at Manchester. But Man City have always denied this. Like they've always gone, well, we haven't done anything, so why are you giving this ban to us? But UEFA haven't done official investigations. They've only done of what they've heard of, and that's what Man City need to, just calm down a little bit. Go, let's talk it out and just see whether they can get it lifted, and if they can't, just take it, accept it, wait 2 years, get back into the Champions League, and then be one of Europe's big clubs again.
Yeah, I think it's, talking about that, saying it's just returning and just keeping that, UEFA, and hoping that Manchester City understand. Does anyone else have any agreements, disagreements on that point?
I think money talks, Matt, if I'm honest with you. I think Manchester City, Manchester City are a club that have, in my opinion, bought a lot of success. And if I could be so bold as to make a prediction, I think that they'll appeal the ban. I think they'll successfully appeal the ban. And I think they'll be allowed back into Europe, probably because money will talk somewhere along the line. I think if it, I don't know where it will, and I wouldn't like to say who it will, but I think they're probably the richest club in the world, because I think it's Sheikh Mansour, isn't it, that owns and runs it. I think in times before, the clubs have got into trouble and bought their way out of trouble. I think if they don't, I think it will be a blessing for the other side club in Manchester. I think it's their only opportunity to become the #1 side in Manchester again. I think they're having a bit of a renaissance at the moment, and I think they'll be praying that that ban is upheld, because if it happens, I think players like Sterling and De Bruyne won't be staying. They won't tolerate no Champions League football for 2 seasons. But I suppose my little conspiracy theory is somewhere along the line, money will talk, and we'll see Man City back in the Champions League. That'll be my prediction, and I'll bet you a week's homework I'm right.
Oh no.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, what was that, Mr.
Sympathy. Chelsea were in a similar boat and got punished for having too many youngsters on loan. And UEFA comes up with its rules, and then the clubs find a way to bend those rules without breaking them. And then the first club gets punished for something that they know they weren't necessarily breaking the rules. They found a loophole for, if you like. So these big clubs, they're looking for a competitive advantage. They're finding a way within some parameter of the rules. But then, UEFA decide their initial rules weren't quite right. So we're going to have to make a stand. So, I imagine, as Mr. Noye said, that, City will have the top lawyers working on this. And they'll find their way out of it. Chelsea had a long ban in the transfer market, and it got reduced. There was no rule to say they couldn't have all these people on loan, and it was quite wise in terms of the transfer ban, and they've got these players coming back. a bit of foresight for them, and they've been punished for it. So I have some sympathy for City, because there's lots of people doing some very strange things. For example, Madrid being funded by the government, and other teams not. That doesn't sound like a fair or level playing field.
No, it seriously isn't. I mean, sorry, but Mr Noye, I really accept your point. You know, money cannot. I mean, why is money buying this? You know, it shouldn't be. It'd be millions and millions and millions of pounds. Think about all the millions of charities out there. Does it really for 2 years? How does it affect, you know, younger? And then Mr Hine overall, yeah, it is what it is really. And it's such a shame, but you know, we're going to have to deal with it. Mr Hulse.
I think it undermines the integrity of the sport. And for me, you know, as an egg chaser to a point, obviously I love my football. I watch my football, but I've played a lot of rugby and I support a lot of rugby as well. And it's quite interesting that the top team in rugby this year, Saracens, have been essentially kind of caught at the same thing, a breach of a salary cap. So in rugby, there's a salary cap that each club can't go above. They breached the salary cap, so kind of broke financial fair play rules in terms of kind of football terms, and they've been instantly relegated. Now they are the champions of 3 years in a row. They're the European Cup holders of a few years in a row. They are the biggest team in Europe, but they haven't been exempt from being cut to League One rugby next season. And it kind of shows that whilst they were breaking the rules, bending the rules, and they were bending the rules because it's all revolving around owning other companies and houses and all of this stuff. It wasn't pure cash. But rugby made a stand, and rugby stood up to it and went, we will not allow this. And I think from an integrity point of view from the sport, that was a very clear decision that they stuck to. And I don't think it looks particularly great in football when you've got, like you said, your Madrid, your Cities, your Chelseas, that we all know at the end of the day will get away with it because they can afford to. And I just think that bigger picture of what does it teach these younger kids? What does it look like when you're supporting these smaller teams? Actually, it's about bending the rules rather than playing by them, which isn't necessarily the message we want to be giving.
Yeah, I mean, it's just mad, isn't it? You know, football with money, but then rugby, they actually stick with the rules and they play with the rules. And I think that's really positive for those younger people, which is really good. And the game as well, you know, you get some few shouting in rugby, but not as much as football. So two completely different sports and two different big perspectives of it. So that is the end of episode 5. Thank you so much for watching. It's been a great episode. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Stay home and listen to government's advice. Goodbye.
See you later.
See you later.